to the Cult of Domesticity podcast, a podcast about history, true crime, and whatever life brings us. I'm Courtney, and every week I am joined by another fascinating person. Let's see what we're going to talk about this week.
Welcome back, devotees. We have Scott from now his plethora of podcasts.
That's right.
You have three.
Plethora of podcasts. Hi, Courtney. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, we just discussed a cheerful case, and because I know I have a lot of notes on this, we're gonna dive in.
We're gonna bring it down. We're gonna pop that.
We're gonna take the baby's blood, pop it, and then give it back the scraps.
Such like life itself. Just when you thought you're gonna be happy. No. We're gonna fix that.
Yep. So, do you know what the Holodomor is?
I don't.
It's good.
Okay.
It's good.
You're scaring me. The longer this goes on, I'm being more...
Oh, we should all be afraid because we're dealing with Stalin. So, the Holodomor is a Ukrainian word. Holod means hunger or starvation, depending on what context, and mor means death or plague.
Okay.
So,
the worst kind of death and the worst kind of starvation, the worst kind of plague is a death.
It's a death plague. And they've determined that it most likely derives from the expression, and again, I do not speak Ukrainian, but I'm going to do my best. And there's also Russian in here, so you're welcome for the pronunciation. Mortere hodolom, which means to inflict death by hunger.
That's pretty good, I think. Not the death by hunger, the pronunciation.
I only took several classes by the same professor who taught Soviet studies and Eastern European studies, so I picked up a little bit. So the Ukrainian famine, it's only 2 years. It's from 1932 to 33. And these are the contested points, because we're going to immediately dive into the fact that it's problematic. The intentions behind the Soviet government on the initiation of the agricultural collectivization in the territory that led up to the famine, the natural causes of the famine versus state-controlled causes, and then the definition of the famine as a genocide. Because yes, that's not even clear that it's actually a genocide.
I suppose, now that you mention it,
it's a genocide.
Yeah. Well, if it's caused by the government, intentional, it's just a matter of how you're, right?
Yeah, and kind of Ukraine was the breadbasket of the Soviet region, which is why it's currently still contentious today. So, Ukraine, it's fun. When Russia was still an empire, so not the Soviet, a different type of empire, whether or not they want to classify it, they pursued a tough left bank of Ukraine colonization policy, which is Russification. And so this is why currently Russia's trying to sneakily take back part of Ukraine, because they were like, there's a bunch of Russians living here. And it's like, yes, you put them there. Granted, it was centuries ago, but still, you put them there. And technically, Crimea was given to Ukraine by the second premier of Russia. So, and the whole goal was to try to destroy the Ukrainian national consciousness, but it didn't do that, and the Ukrainians fought for it. And in 1918, they managed to create a Ukrainian state, the Ukrainian People's Republic, and United Ukrainian Territory, because long names. Soviet Russia, right. We love the long names. Luckily for them, around this time, Bolsheviks come to power. We're not going to do the whole Bolshevik Revolution, because that's like 3 episodes in itself. I don't have time. And they determined that they were going to do the policy of indigenization, aka for this sediment, it's Ukrainianization, lots of zations.
No kidding, yeah. Throw a Stan on there, too.
Yeah. It's one of the non-Stan countries of the Soviet Union. There's a lot of them. And this was really because they had a hard time getting a stable communist regime in Ukraine. Nationalism, when you've been dominated by an empire for a while, tends to come out.
Right.
I don't know why. And nationalism plus communism is oil and water. They repel, which is why nationalism takes down communism, historically. And they were like, okay, they're giving more and more concessions to national sentiment, and they finally get successful in the Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic, and this is when the Soviet Union forms, and they're like, okay, it's an independent state, a lot of the states underneath the umbrella, and we get pretty much, they're doing okay for a while, but then we come to everyone's favorite Soviet, Stalin.
Everyone's favorite Soviet. He probably is. He's got to be the favorite Soviet. Favorite's an interesting word, or the word there. The Romanovs too, but that was obviously well over that. But yeah, in terms of the Soviet Union, for what, the 100 years or so, that I can't think of many others that were. He's one of the more charismatic. I suppose. One of the more interesting.
Yeah, it's him, Gorby, and Brezhnev.
Yes. Yep.
Are
That's
the
true.
ones most. And then I can't remember who came after Stalin, but he's also very popular. But Stalin is kind of the cult of personality was there.
Yes.
He ruled for the longest. He set up the system. So Stalin exploited the centrist and totalitarian tendencies of the Bolshevik ideology to then be like, hey, look at all this power. I'm going to take all this absolute power. Thank you. Good day. He put into place the most extreme aspects of the domestic program of the war of communism. So we already see tendencies towards doing shady things coming back on a large scale. This means rapid industrialization, forced agricultural collectivization, which doesn't go well for a country that was very much not industrialized by the end of the First World War and had separate farms. So collectivization, for people who don't know, is instead of everyone, say you have a grid, and each individual wants a separate person's farm. Well, collectivization says, no, now this is all one farm, and we're all going to farm it together, and we have to produce so much to help the state out. And so instead of having individual people growing different things, they all decide together what they're going to grow, collective. But as anyone knows, forcing people to collectively do that, own the land for generations.
Right.
And generations, and as far as anyone can remember, isn't the best policy.
It's not going to go over superst or ever. No.
Yeah, it does. It gets interesting. So Stalin basically does this so radically and manages to become the unquestionable head of the Soviet Union and Communist Party in the area. So he's like, this is happening. We're making this happen. Okay, guys? Cool. I don't care if you disagree. And remember what I said, Ukraine is the breadbasket, so there's a lot of farms there. And Stalin's like, you know what? To get the collectivization in Ukraine under, we're going to have to do end of independent cultural and political life in here. So welcome to Soviet life.
Completely engrossing the culture, the economy, families, overnight, practically.
Yep. So we're going to go on an anti-Ukrainian campaign. Not great. They're going to take out the most politically vulnerable group in the Ukrainian society, aka non-communist cultural activists. Because you always go after the artists first, I guess.
That's true.
This really kicked off with the 1930 show trial of the Union for the Liberation of Ukraine. I'm going to get some Ukrainian in here. Suzes Vayana Ukraini, known as the SVU, an underground organization led by academic Serfny Nereva, which was really, they're like, we're going to have this trial, but any non-Bolshevik cultural elite of Ukraine, you're either fleeing, you're going to the gulags, which isn't a great time.
No.
And there's a really great book on the gulags, and if you type into gulags, Amazon books, it'll come up. Gulag Archipelago. That's what it is.
Okay.
So if you're interested in gulags, and there's also great memoirs on it.
It's got to be some heavy. It's not a good bedtime story.
Sad thing is, I think it would be a lovely bedtime story, but that
put you to sleep. It's not very comforting.
No, but I don't know. For some reason, one of the individuals in my cohort, that's what he studied. He studied the Bitch War, which was a war in the gulags, and that is its academic name, is called the Bitch War. But he would just be like, yeah, like casual conversation. Yeah, this memoir had like 16 gang rapes in it. And we're just like, oh, really, Adam? Like, any particular reason? Like, that's just my grad school experience.
Yeah.
Is that, and my office mate he had to be careful because he possibly could get kicked out of a country. It's fine. Academia, it's safe. So then, in this trial, the leaders of the Ukrainian Academy of the Sciences in the Ukrainian, should have picked Autophylacious Orthodox Church, were charged with also plotting to overthrow the Soviet rule in Ukraine. So they're like, let's get everyone out. Let's get the sciences out.
Religion.
Let's get the church out. They're like, you're not Soviet. Bye. You're not Soviet. Bye.
It works, though. It always works. Any dissenting perspective, and whoever's left is too scared to do anything.
Yeah. So this is why whenever people say, why do you listen to people who disagree with you? And it's like, because they have a right to their opinion.
Yes, very true.
So they purged the Academy of Sciences. Scientists were either imprisoned or entire institutes were shut down. And they disbanded the Orthodox Church, which Eastern Europe basically Turkey, and east is going to be most likely the Orthodox Church, not Roman Catholic. And then on top of it, all but 2 of its bishops and majority of its lay priests and lay activists were executed or sent to gulags. So we're going great. Yeah. And this is really the end of the first new economic policy. They do 5-year plans. They love 5 years. I think they're all OCD in the Soviet Union because they're always 5, 10-year plans. They're never like 3-year plans, 2-year plans.
Or 10-year plans. Yeah.
Yeah. They're 5 or 10. Had just finished, which was allowing peasantry to make significant economic progress and maintain their traditional lifestyle. But with the collectivization policy that followed, they received really strong resistance throughout the Soviet Union. So not even just Ukraine, like Russia, like peasants.
Straight up Russians, straight up Soviets that have been Soviets for a long time or Russians for a long time.
Yeah. And a lot of these people, the crazy thing is they had just been released as serfs maybe 50 years before, because Russia's technically had slavery for a really long time. Fun facts. So how do they implement, why are they so mad about this new policy? You could be wondering. Pretty much take out old village leadership. Bye. Any opposition, bye. And then this was done through the labeling in Ukrainian as Kirkler or kulak in Russian, which was a well-to-do peasant. So basically, you middle class, bye-bye. You can't be it.
Interesting. So just the serfs, just the impoverished, wealthy remaining.
The wealthy, you probably already had everything taken from you.
Right.
Pretty much middle class and above, you really don't want to be there. Because you're either you're gonna be either exiled, which could mean you leave the country or you go to their favorite place, the gulags, or you're killed, depending on the situation. And this, on top of it, it also applies to anyone who opposed the Bolsheviks, regardless of status. Yeah. So they're collectivizing. So remember, they're taking all the individual farms and they have bigger farms. Well, that's not great, because people have their own systems and they're getting food in. So you have severe food shortages throughout the Soviet Union. And this would lead to mass starvation in Ukraine, the Northern Caucasus, Kazakhstan, and the lower Volga region. So there's not just one, but the Ukrainian one is a special case. Kazakhstan, it lasted 3 years, 1930 to 33. It destroyed over 1 million herdsmen, indigenous nomadic peoples, to institute the sedentary agricultural lifestyle. So they destroyed entire cultures and ways of life in collectivization. The lower Volga region famine affected predominantly ethnic Germans and Don Cossacks. And we're going to get to the main fatal one, the famine in Ukraine. So we have the collectivization happening, and Ukraine's population is a little over 30 million. We're going to cut that down by a fifth. So
during this,
during 2 years.
2 years. And this is all a result of their not really, but their economic policy just for the preservation of the Soviet.
Yeah, to change the entire life, systemization.
That didn't work.
No, it didn't.
That was not a good plan.
Oh, it gets worse. The unofficial tagline of my podcast, it gets worse.
It can always be worse, and it will be. Just stay tuned.
So the Ukrainian nation had gotten some concessions made to the peasantry, and if you're making a war against the peasantry of Ukraine, which was the majority, it's basically okay, we're going to take on the Ukrainian nation.
Right. Pitchforks and...
Yes. The peasants fought hard against the seizure of their farms, destruction of their culture, because, that's also happening, and desecration of their churches, because, the Soviets need money, because let me tell you, World War I did a number on the Russian Empire. World War II will do a bigger number, but World War I set it up. Their reaction was branded as kulak nationalism, and collectivization was the best way to destroy it and free the peasantry. So what do you do with that? You send urban outsiders into the village to force peasants onto collective farms and then seize grain for the state.
Right. And now you're free.
You're free. You all live together.
Clearly you're free.
And remember the fact that I said they're seizing grain, because that's going to come up again. The real problem with the collectivization was because they couldn't meet these unreasonably high quotas of grain contributions, and then you get put on blacklists. So basically, the Soviet state was like, you're going to produce this much grain. It doesn't matter if it's feasible or not. You're producing this much grain.
Right.
And then people would lie, and there was a lot of corruption happening. And mind you, this Soviet state is not yet 10 years old. well, maybe 10 to 20 years old. So we're going great. So if your collective got blacklisted, you get purges and total blockade.
So you cut off areas of the country or areas of the nation that are not producing what they need to and are not just way of life. The new rules and then you're left with what? This checkerboard decreasing productivity. Like, it's not a great plan to begin with. Obviously, these areas that are cut off, those are cut off from your economy for good. They're gone, right?
Well, they basically, so you send the leadership away, so you don't have anyone who can like lead a resistance. They're going to the Soviets' favorite place, the gulags. And what I mean by blocking off is nothing comes in. They're still taking grain out.
Okay.
So that's a bye-bye collective. So we're just going to black out that square because everyone's dead.
Right.
So while this is happening, Soviet propaganda is like, look at these well-fed collective farm workers with smiling grain, like, and they're taking all the grain. Like, they're not leaving anything for them to eat.
Mm-hmm. So they are slaves. They're economic slaves.
Yes.
Basically.
We're going to starve the resistance out of. We see by 1932, when the deaths from the starvation begin to occur on a mass scale, all the kulaks had already been either liquidated, which means killed,
right,
or exiled to Siberia. And the agriculture is pretty much collectivized at this point. So you have anyone who can resist is either dead or sent away. You have to be on these collectivized farms, and everything's fine.
Right. It's going great. This is a great new idea. Good policy.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing to see.
Yeah. The party continues to attack the starving peasantry pretty much through the press, saying, like, look at it, like, because everyone is hungry. Like, the collective, it takes a while for the system to take over. Instead of doing, all at once, if you're gonna do it, maybe do, like, here's a collectivized farm. You guys, like, make up the difference. Slowly take everyone to that. No, they did the entire Soviet Union at once, which is insane. And remember, I said they were putting out those posters that were like, if you've ever loved Soviet propaganda like I do, because it's ridiculous. They're all like, look at how happy we are. Mm-hmm. We're so well fed. Here's grain. And it's not true. The 1932 harvest, they were able to procure 4.3 million tons compared with the 7.2 million tons obtained from the previous year's harvest. So that's gone down 3 million.
Yeah, but like half.
Mm-hmm.
More than.
They had been rationing in the towns, and that got cut back. And basically, throughout the winter of 1932-33 in the spring, many urban area people were starving. They had been supplied, like, their rationing had been good because they could help out other people. But when it's cut, you also can't do anything. And you need the urban workers because they're also basically industrializing an entire country where, say, America and Europe, they started it really hardcore in the 1850s, and you had already about 70 years of industrialization. Right. Russia is trying to do that in 5 years.
Right.
Which is not possible.
So why don't they bail at this point? Like, what keeps these guys, these leaders, these countries from just, wait a minute, it's time for a performance. Let's see that this is not one. Come up with something.
Have you watched the miniseries Chernobyl?
Not yet. I heard something about that. I was all set. I was ready to go, and then someone told me about, I'm one of those guys. You were talking about this on one of your last episodes. My wife stopped watching Game of Thrones in that first season when they killed the dog.
Yeah.
That's less me, but my wife for sure. Didn't they do something to a dog? They had to go around killing all the pets? In that documentary?
Yeah, the miniseries. I mean, they actually did it because they were so radioactive.
Yeah, I get it.
They had. It was literally someone's job to go around. There was like 3 of them. They would go around and they'd have to make sure they got all the pets because they couldn't risk them. One, it's a large area that they had to do, right. And so imagine that many pets. It's going to create problems. That's not till later on. I think it's still really good. I would say also the podcast that accompanies it is really good because it explains the decisions they made. And it's only a couple episodes, but they discuss the Soviet Union and even Russia still today. They're all about saving face. It is the history of Russia is they do not want to be humiliated.
Right. That's true. That's like Stalin's first, not Stalin, I'm thinking of Putin now. People forget about Russia, that their entire government has fallen twice in 100 years. So with all this other stuff that Putin's got not, but his prime focus, I think, is the pride of Russia. Always has been, like with Stalin too. Even at the height of World War II. So yeah, I see that, and it's like a denial though. Like you're only hurting yourself because you can see that this is not coming out, and yet it never fails. All of them, the most totalitarian nations, empires ever destroy themselves because they're no, this is a good idea, and rather than admit we're wrong, we're just going to keep doing this.
Yeah, this is all just saving face that collectivization is working.
Right.
And eventually I'll have to cover it. Mao's industrialization process and all of that. The people knew it wasn't working. Like they were trying to make steel in villages and it just wasn't working, but they keep going on until like they run out of people.
Right.
Like it's kind of what happened. And I mean, the Soviet Union has a lot of people. It's how they won World War II. You eventually just keep throwing people at them and someone's running out of people. So yeah, that's why they did, like, also it's for the lower, like, say you're in charge of a region. Well, you don't want to go up to your boss and say you failed.
Yeah.
You're like, oh no, we're good. Numbers are good.
You're going to end up in the gulag with your predecessor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Chernobyl did really well, is like showing what happens when you don't do the save the face thing. Because ultimately, our two main characters in that, or two main, let's say characters, they were real men. The two men, they eventually were like, no, we can't keep doing this.
Right.
Like, granted, they didn't do it in front of the world stage. They just did it in a trial, but it doesn't, even to other Soviets, it doesn't look well.
And to some degree, that's probably what led to the first place, the event happening by itself, because they're not going to ask for help. They're not going to seek outside. Like with their space program, that's what happened, is eventually they couldn't do it by themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of something's wrong. They aren't willing to fix it until something catastrophic happens.
But we have to pretend that everything's over just like America. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sure.
So at the same time, urban residents are starting to starve. The workers, the agricultural workers or peasants have already been starving. The Soviet propaganda machine shows workers ag-prop movies where it's like, oh, these peasants are counter-revolutionaries. They're hiding the grains and the potatoes for when the workers who are industrializing and building this great new nation are starving. So they're pitting the urban centers against the rural areas, and they're both starving to death. The first time we get reports out that there are mass malnutritions and deaths from starvation were two areas of the city of Uman in January 1933, and this is in the Vinnytsia and Kiev Oblast, so like regions. And there did end up being Western journalists and people who were in the area at that time. I'm probably not going to be able to share the pictures because Facebook will tell me they're horrible. But you can look up. They're just people, like, there's just dead people in the streets. Like, it's really bad. By mid-January, the reports of the mass difficulties in the food urban areas.
Really? Is that what they called them?
Yeah.
Mass difficulties.
Mass difficulties. And because they had been undersupplied through the rationing system, and of course, they're not really reporting it accurately. Good old Soviet reporting. And then they were also people who had withdrawn from the rationing supply because it was to comply with the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Ukraine decree December 1932. So there's also a decree that some people have to withdraw. Then we have, in February, reports from other authorities of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, and I definitely did not say that right, that they're, on top of the starvation, they're also getting epidemics of typhus and malaria.
Nice. Just can't catch a...
Nope. And then Odessa and Kiev Oblast are reporting that as well, and we're on top of it getting mass reports of starvation by March in the Kiev Oblast. So like these whole, like, it's entire regions that are just, there's no food, very little food. On top of it, the government raises the requisition quotas for the grain even higher, and only in Ukraine sent special brigades to find and remove any remaining foodstuffs and livestock.
Wow. So
picking
on Ukraine, especially after all this.
Ukraine and Russia have a very unique relationship in that they've both had positions of control at points in history, and Ukraine has been absorbed and kind of like the little brother to Russia for so long, but Ukraine has its own rich heritage,
Right.
and it's wonderful, and they want to be their own country, and
They're
this
like
is how...
step siblings, as it were.
Yes.
Kind of.
And they both want to be their own person.
I don't know what the end game is, though. Like, what are they hoping is going to change this? We're just going to keep doing this until what?
Ukraine is compliant.
Right, but even if Ukraine were, they're still going to have the output in there and the rest of the Soviet Union. So it's like, it's especially as they like raise now the output demands, which they know aren't going to be met because their output demands now aren't. So it's like, what are they hoping for?
But remember, there's also that chain of lying that's happening as well, where one official is saying, yes, we're producing this. The next official says, yes, yes,
Right.
yes, all the way up. So no one actually knows how much.
I see.
Like,
so
until
as with like a monarchy, it's like the king thinks everything's good because no one wants to tell him it's not.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then sometimes, this is what I love about the Soviet system, they lie and say they're producing more.
Right. Huh.
So that's probably why they raised it. The Ukrainian communist officials led by Mykola Skrzynevich protested to Stalin that people were actually dying. So they're trying to inform Stalin, like, hey, this is not working. We're having, like, mass deaths. Stalin, who's like, you know what? We've had a lot of problem with that Ukrainian nationalism, publicly blames the Ukrainian party for its criminal negligence in failing to meet the grain quotas. So what does he do? Good old Stalin fashion. He sends Vyacheslav Motolov and Lazar Kazovich to dictate the policy to the Ukrainian Communist Party and its government. And on top of it, he sends his close ally, Pavel Postyev, to Ukraine as a virtual dictator. So he's sending his friends down like, hey, make sure this shit gets done.
Right.
And nationalism is gone. Okay, thanks. Which, I don't know if you know how hard it is to get rid of nationalism.
Yeah, and the more you try, it tends to be more stubborn.
Look at Poland.
Yep.
Poland wasn't a country for most of, like, the 18th, 19th century. Briefly between World War I and World War II, and then Russia and Germany solved that problem.
And for all the crap that people give France for surrendering so forth too, it was the French resistance that, never really went away. It was underground, but it really helped, when things got tough. The Nazis, it really helped the Americans, especially the Russians. Yeah, you can't kill it. You can't just go in there, send 3 guys from the Kremlin and say, yeah, you're going to do this now. Okay, sure, you're right. Why didn't I see that before?
It's because we never think of nationalism always as a good thing or a weapon, but we've weaponized it so many times because people we collectivize around ethnic groups or countries.
It's just what we do as people. Yeah.
So Postyayev ordered even more grain to be collected. Again, remember I said they're going to send people in, like soldiers in. They're going to just go, they're tearing apart your house and taking any food you have.
Finding the grain.
Under his rule in January 1933, it was described as the Ukrainian countryside became a vast death camp. On top of it, he's carrying out, Postyev is carrying out a wave of terror against the Ukrainian intelligentsia and basically hounded the head of the party, Sternekev, to suicide.
Wow.
So this is not going well.
No.
And it's gonna get worse. So they purged the Ukrainian Communist Party. Really only a couple have survived. Stalin should be known for his purges. He's a big fan. He likes purging things, his documents, people, countries. So by mid-April, the Kiev Oblast has reached the top of the most affected list. When you have to have an affected list, it's not great.
No, yeah, it's like a Letterman top 10 list of my empire's worst of the worst places.
Yeah. And then we have also on that list Kiev, which we all know is now the capital of Ukraine, so Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa, Vinnytsia, and Donetsk Oblast. On top of the Moldovan Soviet state, the republic next door with us. It's SSR by abbreviation. So you kind of can't hide that you're starving basically two republics. So it begins to leak out about the mass death, and it's the less affected areas, the Chernov Oblast and the northern parts of Kiev and Vinnytsia Oblast are doing okay. My favorite is the Central Committee of Ukraine decree of February 8th, 1933 said there is no hunger cases that should have remained untreated because we're rationing again, guys. It's fine. It's fine.
Wait, what? There's no hunger
Yep.
because we're rationing?
Yeah, that's basically what they said.
Okay.
The Central Committee of the Communist Republic
Interesting logic.
said that yeah. Again, they're saving face.
Right.
They're like, because people are starting to ask questions and they're like, we're rationing so everyone gets food. Guys, it's fine.
Wow.
And then, like, they just pull a curtain over Ukraine.
Exactly.
Don't look, no starving people there. So they're now getting local authorities to submit reports about the numbers suffering from hunger, reasons for the hunger, number of deaths, food aid provided from local sources, and centrally provided food aid required. They're managing a parallel reporting and food assistance in the Ukraine. And you can actually still go and see these reports. They're available depending on how Russian archives are going to be.
Right.
Ukrainian archives, I think, are slightly better, but you still need bribe money. The Ukrainian Weekly, which was tracking the situation in 1933, reported that on top of the fact that everyone's starving, there's difficulties in communication and, like, getting the word out. We also have widespread cannibalism documented because, and I have a whole section of eyewitnesses, so it's going to get darker. Some of these people, they might have just passed, but, like, they did a really good job. There's oral history projects on this, numerous, and I'm going to share some. But you have to think, okay, are you gonna eat a dead person, or are you a dead person?
Sure.
At this point.
Yeah.
We have a documentation of a woman doctor who wrote to a friend in June in 1933. So again, it's not done. That she had not yet become a cannibal because, quote, not sure that I shall be one by the next time my letter reaches you, end quote. The good people died first. Those who refused to steal or prostitute themselves died. Those who gave food to others died. Those who refused to eat corpses died. Those who refused to kill their fellow man died. Parents who resisted cannibalism died before their children.
That's rough. That's rough.
Oh, it gets worse. The Soviet regime printed posters declaring, quote, to eat your own children is a barbaric act, end quote.
That's good parenting advice.
Yeah. Yep.
So
they're good advice.
Basically saying at that point, guys, it's not that bad. You don't have to eat your kids. Stop telling everybody else you're eating your children. You don't have to do that. You're fine. We're rationing. Right.
Yeah, because they're reading letters because the Soviets love surveillance. They've determined that more than 2,500 people were convicted of cannibalism during the Holodomor.
Wow. Convicted? So they were trying these people?
Oh, of course.
What? Yeah, well, yes. Huh.
Who doesn't love a good show trial?
It's an interesting, trial. Like, what's the evidence? I guess your neighbor disappeared.
We saw you eating a dude's arm.
I guess that, yep. There you go. Wow.
Yeah. Posyasev has determined that the Ukrainians had at last been broken of their horrible nationalist tendency, and he allowed the peasants to keep part of what they harvest in the fall of 1933.
Keep part of it. That's nice.
Part of it.
Very magnanimous. Yeah. So you don't have to eat your kids until spring.
Mm-hmm. It gradually subsided, so didn't stop right away. So that's why it's about 2 years. Having claimed about 3 to 6 million lives, according to ongoing research. The official Ukrainian government estimates it a little higher, about 7 to 8 million lives. And that could also count, like, lasting effects of the starvation, because what people don't tell you about that is you've starved for that long. Right. Your body's kind of broken.
Isn't it amazing with, like, this and Holocaust numbers, where our rounding errors are, like, give or take 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, where now it's so exact, and we would document everything hopefully much better now. But the documentation either didn't exist or hasn't survived. So we have, like, no earthly idea. Like, millions of people, give or take.
This one, I'm sure they documented it as best they could, but it's, again, those documents have vanished.
Right.
The Germans, they destroyed them because they love taking good records, we know.
That's true.
There's documentation that they did when you entered, and they knew who they were killed, unless you were killed randomly. It's just, where did those documents go?
Because they were so obsessed with, like, the concentration camps of being so efficient. How efficient can we possibly? That's true. Probably not as well documented here, but if they're having trials, and there was some documentation. It's just amazing. Give or take 5, 10. It's like, wow, that's a lot of people to be unsure, of what happened.
Yeah, I'm guessing the documentation is either in a Russian archive, and I know for a fact from people who've gone, when they're requesting funding to go do archival study, they include bribe money. Mm-hmm. Like, they budget in bribe money. And my other favorite thing is you have to pretend like you're not interested. Like, straight up, we had a class and it was like, someone came in, they're like, yeah, so, like, Latin America, like, some areas in Eastern Europe, probably China. You just act like you're like, I'm kind of like thinking about this, but you know.
Then you slip a couple $100. And by the way, where's the section on the genocide?
It's like, because my friend almost had to bribe someone in Mexico City, but her advisor knew like the staff, and like she called them and helped her out. Legitimately. You have like, it's weird, but sometimes in research situations, you have to bribe your way to get the documents you need.
Yeah, those could be destroyed, though, I guess, in this case. Those records.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think?
Or they're just lost.
Do you think they're still somewhere in the some basement?
I think if they're in Ukraine, they would have published them.
Yeah, that's true.
Unless it had Ukrainians involved.
Right.
Because that's a gray area. They're putting it as a Russian-induced. But if it's in the Kremlin, I'm sure they still have it.
There's some.
Someone goes down and just, like, when they're thinking about Ukraine, they just go down there and stare at them and, I don't know, pretend they're a villain.
It's like I imagine the Vatican vault, the Vatican library.
Oh, I've heard it's amazing, Ben. But are you ready for some real-life accounts?
Is there going to be sunshine? Nope, no sunshine.
Nope.
Ain't no sunshine. All right.
Yeah, go back and listen to Scott's episode after this, is basically if you want some sunshine.
Just don't go to bed right away, I guess, maybe.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to have pretty bad dreams about cannibalism.
Yeah. So, okay, quote, "Please return the grain that you have confiscated from me. If you don't return it, I'll die. I'm 78 years old, and I'm incapable of searching for food by myself." So this is a petition to authorities by I.A. Rula. Quote, "I saw the ravages of the famine of 1932 to 33 in Ukraine. Hordes of families in rags begging at the railway stations, women lining up, lifting up to the compartment with their starving brats, which with drumstick limbs, big cavernous heads, and puff bellies looked like embryos out of alcohol bottles," end quote. This is from Arthur Koestler, a famous British novelist, journalist, and critic, and he was in Kavardik during 3 months of the famine. And you can he wrote about his experiences in the book, The God That Failed, which has testimonies from ex-communists and stuff like that too. Quote, "Our fathers used to read the Bible to us, but when he came to the passage that mentioned bloodless war, he could not explain to us what that term meant. When in 1933 he was dying from hunger, he called us to his deathbed and said, 'This, children, is what is called a bloodless war,' end quote. And that's remembered by Hannah Doroshenko. Quote, "What I saw that morning was inexpressibly horrible. On the battlefield, men die quickly. They fight back. Here I saw people dying in solitude by slow degrees, dying hideously without the excuse of sacrifice for a cause. They had been trapped and left to starve, each in his own home, by a political decision made in a far-off capital around conference tables and banquets. There was not even the consolation of the inevitability to relieve the horror," end quote. And that's Viktor Kravchenko, a Soviet defector. From 1931 to 34, we had great harvest. The weather conditions were great. However, the grain was taken from us. People searched the field for mice burrows, hoping to find a measly amount of grain stored by mice." And that's Mykola Karpshov. Yeah. Like it wasn't that they were having bad harvest. It was just everything was taken. Quote, "I still get nauseous when I remember the burial hole that all the dead livestock was thrown into. I still remember people screaming by that hole, driven to madness by hunger. People were ripping the meat of the dead animals. The stronger ones were getting bigger pieces. People ate dogs, cats, and just about anything to survive," end quote. By Vasilia Borisana. Quote, "People were dying all over our village. The dogs ate the ones that were not buried. If people could catch the dogs, they were in the neighboring village. People ate bodies that they dug up," end quote. That's Morieva Morisova.
Wow.
I'm going to skip down to one of the bigger ones. Quote, "Where did all the bread disappear? I do not really know. Maybe they have taken it all abroad. The authorities have confiscated it, removed from the villages, loaded grain into the railway coaches, and took it away someplace. They have searched houses, taken away everything to the smallest thing. All the vegetable gardens, all the cellars were raked out, and everything was taken away. Wealthy peasants were exiled into Siberia before the Holodomor. During the collectivization, communists came, collected everything. Children were crying, beaten for that with the boots. It is terrifying to recall what happened. It was so dreadful that every day became engraving in my memory. People were lying everywhere as dead flies. The stench was awful. Many of our neighbors and acquaintances from our street died. I have no idea how I managed to survive and stay alive. In 1933, we tried to survive the best we could. We collected grass, goosefoot, burdocks, rotten potatoes, and made pancakes, soups from putrid beans or nettles. Collected glay from the tree and ate sparrows, pigeons, cats, dead, and live dogs. When there were still cattle, it was eaten first, then domestic animals. Some were eating their own children. I would have never been able to eat my child. One of our neighbors came home when her husband, suffering from near starvation, ate their own baby daughter. The woman went crazy. People were drinking a lot of water to fill their stomach. That is why the bellies and legs were swollen. The skin was swelling from the water as well. At that time, the punishment for a stolen handful of grain was 5 years of prison. One was not allowed to go into the fields. The sparrows were pecking at the grain, though the people were not allowed, end quote. And that's Alexandra Roloskovsky.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Nobody, like, we have no way anymore, in a first world connected society, we can't relate to that. Like, we can't even relate, I don't feel like here in our country, especially to the imagery of what that is like. But that wasn't that long ago. I mean, that was less than 100 years ago.
Yeah. I've got 2 more, and then we'll talk about whether or not it's a genocide. Because, again, that is still debated by some people. Quote, the famine began. People were eating cats, dogs in the Rose River. All the frogs were caught. Children were gathering insects in the fields and died swollen. Stronger peasants were forced to collect the dead to the cemetery. They were stocked on carts like firewood, then dropped off in one big pit. The dead were all around, on the roads, near the river, by the fences. I used to have 5 brothers. Altogether, 792 souls have died in our village during the famine war year, 135. So that's Antonia. So that's over 700 people died during the Holodomor. 135 died during the war years. That's just the comparison. It's
bloodless war. Like that one said.
Yeah. Okay, the last one. Quote, I remember the Holodomor very well, but have no wish to recall it. There were so many people dying then. They were laying out in the streets, in the fields, floating with the flux. My uncle lived in Derveka. He died of hunger, and my aunt went crazy. She ate her own child. At that time, one couldn't hear the dogs barking. They were all eaten up, end quote. And that's Galina Smyrna. So I think that one of the really good things, like I said, there's oral history projects. So you can go see individuals who lived through it discussing this and talking about it. And they have written accounts, all of it. Because like a lot of these, I'm not going to say controversial, contested genocides, I'm going to say. Because there's a larger consensus that says, yes, this is a genocide. And then there's the small populations who tended to have implemented it that say, no, it wasn't a genocide. There's so much evidence that they came in and took it that you're like, how is this not?
Right.
So we have, at the time, and this is from Walter Durney, who worked for the New York Times, and he's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, wrote of the famine, quote, any report of the famine in Russia today is an exaggeration or malignant propaganda. There is no starvation or deaths from starvation. There is a widespread mortality from diseases due to malnutrition. And so you have these journalists who are taking that Soviet propaganda, they're eating it up, and they're publishing it. And then we have the accounts of people who were there who were like, they're literally holding their children up to see if they can get anything, or someone will take their
eating
child.
Their children. Yeah. When was that New York Times story written?
That one was from the time. It was from the 32s, yeah.
So basically just reprinting what was probably told inside of the story. Yeah. That wasn't like a historical analysis done after. That was,
No, that was what the Soviet authorities were putting out.
Right.
On top of it, the Soviet Union is refusing any aid because their official party line is
because Russia,
there is no famine.
Soviets, exactly. There is no famine.
If you claim contrary, you're spreading anti-Soviet propaganda.
Right.
And Western governments really were passive because no one really was aware, or they were aware through confidential diplomatic channels. So if they say it, they're getting their source killed. So
True.
It's like...
Yeah. And there's obviously no CNN footage of this on any TVs that don't exist yet. So, but we're still passive to a degree today. Like if it's happening other side of the planet, we tend to try to forget.
Yeah. So it's 1933. FDR just gets elected, and he had decided to formally recognize the Soviet Union and Stalin's government specifically, and negotiated trade deals. So you don't want to just mess up that relationship with your new trade partner.
Right. Yeah. And no one, how many Americans knew what was going on
Yeah.
at that time? If any in government, if FDR.
And, do you want to mess up the trade deal in order to deal with the famine? And most
Right.
countries, especially at that time, weren't going to. And then now, Ukraine emigres after this really pushed to be like, this is a genocide. This was a genocide of the Ukrainian people. And it didn't really get success until, you want to guess? You want to guess when it?
When people started believing,
Yeah.
Man, probably, well, it would have to have been after Stalin. Or after maybe the fall of the Soviet Union. Was it that late?
A little bit.
So maybe...
Said it gets worse.
So it's relatively recent, after the Berlin Wall. So is it like, it's not like 2 years ago.
No,
Okay.
no, it's not 2 years ago. The late 80s.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Because, I mean, when the curtain went down, that's when anybody outside of Russia finally had a view of some of those files, some of those records.
Yeah, it really was with the publication of the book A Harvest of Sorrow by Robert Conquest, and it was also made into a report to the UN Commission on the Ukrainian Famine, and they also had the findings of the International Commission of Inquiry into the 1932-1933 famine in Ukraine. On top of it, they released the documentary Harvest of Despair to bring attention to it.
So this was like a rumor at best for 50s.
Yeah.
Especially in the West.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
There were some people that had brought it, so it was, I think if you were in academic circles, it was kind of known about, but you couldn't do a lot of research on it because anytime you would be published, you can't go back.
Right.
I didn't work with one professor, but he's banned from going back to China because of his work on, I believe, the Uyghurs. Like, it still happens. If you publish things, they're like, you can't come back. And I feel like in the Soviet situation, there might have been a bullet involved. So it really comes out because Soviet Ukraine didn't talk about it. Independence in 91 basically was a run on the archives for academics. And I know people who they said, yeah, no, fall of the wall. You're like Western academics were on that, getting visas going in there. Because really, they were like, I think you probably had to pay some, but yeah, go in, take pictures.
It was like it was a land grab. It was like, we're going to go get it before they're destroyed or before someone else takes them Yeah, people
were going to see the records the KGB had on them and who reported on you.
Right.
Like, that's the crazy thing. You could look up and see, like, your neighbor said this shit about you. It's insane.
Yeah.
So the archives open up in 91. They work on oral testimony from living survivors. And pretty much that is proof that it's a genocide. In November 28th, 2016, Verkhovna Rada, the parliament of the Ukraine, passed a decree defining the Holodomor as a deliberate act of genocide. But I said it's contested. Who do we think's contesting it?
Do the Russians still contest it to this day?
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Not really.
Yeah.
It's the testimony and you watching it. It's just
right.
It's when they're going into your house and taking every scrap of looking for people would hide food like you were others were hiding the Jewish population and dissidents in occupied Germany areas. Like, that's how bad it was.
Right.
Like, you would and they would look for it, and the times they found most of it. So the Russian government continues to call the Ukrainian depiction of the famine, quote, a one-sided falsification of history, end quote. It is recognized, in the article I found, as a genocide by approximately 24 nations, is now the focus of a considerable international research and documentation. Yeah. So really the only people who are still, saying it's one-sided are the Russians, but
it's still being studied.
Yeah.
We didn't figure out it happened really until 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, and I found out about this in
I've
a
never
college
heard
class.
of this. I've never freaking heard of this. I can't believe that. But no, I haven't.
No, it's just crazy to think. Literally, if we're going with the highest number, 8 million people killed because of deliberate starvation.
Right.
And in such a short period. That's the crazy thing, too, if you think about it. Let's say we're going to say it started in 1930.
So 3 years.
3 years, and we'll extend it to 35 conservatively for them to get their food supply back up. That's 5 years. That's approximately
0.2 something a year. Or,
1.5.
Yeah.
So.
And they kept it quiet basically for 50.
Well, it's not like Chernobyl where
couldn't keep it.
You couldn't keep that quiet. This, some people had gotten out and talked about it, but the Soviet propaganda machine is so, like, the propaganda machine, if you have it set up, can be so powerful to hide, like, blatant truth. And, I mean, there's a couple other cases like this, mostly Latin America, that I want to cover, but I value my sanity. That you see these things and it's like the propaganda machine is what continues it because other people are literally screaming, they're killing.
Yeah, it brings you back to the status quo. It's like whenever you doubt, all you have to do is turn on the TV or find a newspaper, and it's like, oh yeah, that's what I'm supposed to be. Gotcha.
Yeah.
And it's right back to, it's the government everywhere. It's like everywhere I look, I see the Soviet Nazi. South America too, like you say, are pretty good at.
Yeah. So you're welcome for learning.
No kidding. Well, I'm glad I know it because it happened. So I don't want to be unaware of something that killed 5-8 million people. If you would have told me something happened in the last 150 years anywhere involving the death of 5, I would have told you I knew about it. I would have guaranteed that, but I didn't. I didn't know. I mean, obviously, you know about the Soviet Union broader context, but not a happy place to live ever, really. Russia never has been. But specific to the Ukraine, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact that you say the word Holodomor and only a small selection of the population knows what it is really bothers me because it shows how good they were and how we need to be like, hey, we need to learn from this. We need to understand this. And collectivizing great.
It's not going to work. And trying to save face is not the best way to solve problems when you're governing an entire continent, people. Yeah. We don't have we, especially in America, we don't have a concept of that. Like, I look at the old footage of World War II. Like, I don't think we have mass starvation on a scale of millions of people. I don't think eating your own children is not something that Americans can't relate to being that.
I think in some regards, the Great Depression, like the first couple of years where it was really bad, in some cases with the Dust Bowl, not the level of eating your children.
That's true.
But like
now
people sold their children.
We're also 2 generations removed from that now. Everyone's fat and happy.
Yeah. And then we also have like Indian removal policies is I think the other closest thing we have.
That's true. I mean, yeah, in our history we can relate to that, but you and I walking around outside to that. Can't even I hear looking in the mice houses, the mice burrows for some grain. I can't relate to that. That's not on my list. And obviously, there are some parts of the world that can relate to that, but we can't. So it's, in some ways, like you say, never forget that kind of stuff. I don't know if I can. What does it say about whatever that I didn't even know that was a thing? The whole story. Those 5 or 8 million people didn't even know.
I think it says a lot about how our school systems view world history. And then it really says how good the Soviet propaganda machine was. I mean, that's why whenever I see that appear propaganda-ish, I like to delve into them more and figure out, what are you not telling me?
Sure. And it's always been there. It's here now in this country on all sides, different sides. But it's not the same as coming from the States. Yeah. In the Goebbels way, Soviet. Yeah. That was a good story. That was not a fun story, but that was an educational story for sure. So I'm glad you picked that one. I am going to have to turn on. This is one of those. I have to turn on an episode of The Office for about 20 minutes before I go to bed.
Yeah. Do you want to plug all of your plethora of shows?
Yeah, thank you. I have 3 podcasts. I have Frozen Truth is a deep dive investigative look into 3 unsolved missing persons cases. I went out to Wyoming for Amy Rowe Bechtel, who was a runner who disappeared. I went to Maine for a toddler, Ayla Reynolds, who disappeared from her father's care. And I went to Iowa, which is right by, for Jody Husentrut. She was a news anchor who was abducted from her apartment. All those, they're different levels of mystery. Some, to be honest, are less mysterious than others. Some, like seasons 1 and 3, are really mysterious. Kind of know what happened in season 2, just to be honest. But you can go back and listen to the whole series. Heather Wright and I, our friend Heather Wright, and I do a podcast called Status Pending, which is a monthly, case-a-month, research-based, investigative, unsolved, unresolved cases with lingering questions about them. She and I talk to law enforcement, to family members, to PIs, anybody that will talk to us about our cases. That's been a gratifying, crazy experience over the last year or so. And I just launched a new one called Dead and Gone in Wyoming. It's just fun stories as fun as stories about murder can be. Not a comedy. It's research-based. It's got some history in there, some context of history of the state of Wyoming. It's all limited to Wyoming. There a mystery, or I should say a murder and a missing persons case every month. And that one just launched, Dead and Gone in Wyoming. When are you getting other podcasts? When are you getting 2 and 3?
Heather and I have talked about starting another one.
She does not need, you can't let her do that. Do not enable her to have a 4th. Actually, at this point, she's got 4, I think.
It would be 5th.
Jeez. I don't know.
But I think I would be doing all the back end work. But probably when I get a stable job.
I was going to say.
That would help.
At this point with Heather, friends don't let friends start podcasts. You have to draw the line. She probably could do it.
Just have a campaign. Don't let Heather start another podcast.
Right. Everybody, it's an intervention to supervise. She would too. If she could do nothing but podcast full time, she'd be the happiest little clam.
Oh,
she'd be just fun. I guess we all probably would too. I do like your show, and again, congratulations on your success. Please have me back. This is fun.
Oh yes.
This is awesome.
Thank you for coming on. This was overdue because I think Heather's been trying to introduce us since I met her in November.
Yep. Well, we finally just had to meet in Chicago in real life.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Which is the opposite of podcast meeting normally.
Yeah. It's weird because Heather and I knew each other for like probably a year before we actually met in person. So it was like, I don't know if that's like how online dating used to be, or how like if you play Dungeons and Dragons online or something. It's podcasting is like a cross between those things. But it is weird. It was weird for about 5 minutes to meet in person in Chicago months ago. But then it was fun. They're just nerdy, dorky. When you and I got talking about history, I was like, "Give me a lawn chair. I'm good. Let's hang out here for the rest of the day."
Yeah.
So, but
yeah, who will be the guest next week? I don't know. I think I have it scheduled. Who's to say?
It'll be good, whoever it is. Can't wait to listen.
Yeah, and then go binge all of Scott's. Just go. That's your task for the week. Binge all of them.
We have to bring our heads up for air out of. So yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, guys.
I can't say missing and murdered women or my cases. Oh man, that was good though. It was healthy. I feel like I've grown. I feel like I've learned some perspective.
Okay, bye guys.
See you later.
Hi, true crime fans. I'm Erin.
And I'm Shay. We host All Crime No Cattle, a conversational podcast which focuses on true crime stories from the Lone Star State.
We strive to bring you a balanced and well-researched story about Texas cases big and small.
We do the research so you don't have to.
We also end every episode with a good news story, just to remind everyone that real life isn't quite as depressing as true crime can make it out to be.
New episodes drop every Thursday, and you can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. All Crime No Cattle, because crime is bigger in Texas, y'all.
Cult of Domesticity. We're available on all podcatchers. Remember to rate, review, subscribe to help spread the word, or just force other people to listen to it. Our Facebook and Twitter are at Domestic Podcast, and our Instagram is at the Cult of Domesticity. We also have podcast merch at Threadless. As well, if you want to support us financially or show some appreciation, we have a PayPal tip jar and a Patreon, which has some pretty great perks. Any topic suggestions, feel free to email us at domesticpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to stay domestic and cult free.